Welcome, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. And most of you know, because you may have seen an invitation, but let me just sort of start out with a few introductions. I, by the way, am Jay Richards. I'm on the faculty at the Bush School of Business here at the Catholic University of America. And I'm also a fellow of the Institute for Human Ecology, also at Catholic U. And we have a really exciting, fairly new program. In fact, it's just been here a couple of years, an MA in Human Rights directed by William Saunders, who is also affiliated with the Institute for Human Ecology. And I've known Bill, I figured this out, that we met Bill actually, I think in August of 1998 when you were working with Robbie George. I think he was on the US Commission on Civil Rights. Yeah. And I was really, really young then. I'd like to say I was just an intern, but
well, I think I just got out of high school. It was amazing.
No, exactly. We were both just sort of high school. We were pages at the time. So let me just introduce people to you. So Bill's a Juris Doctor. He's a graduate of the Harvard Law School. He's been involved for many years here in Washington, D.C. in issues of public policy and law and ethics. And in fact, officially for 30 years. But you know, when you start in high school, that stuff can happen. A lot of you probably read his pieces. He's a regular columnist for the National Catholic's Bioethics Quarterly, and has written widely on topics related to human rights, and especially on the integration of human rights in Catholic social teaching. He's given lectures around the world at law schools and colleges. And he's also, as I mentioned, he's the director of the program in human rights for the Institute of Human Ecology. And that's actually what we're here to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about this new MA in Human Rights program. So we just want to go over the sort of basics. And this is, if you have friends or you know other people that you think might be interested in this, we're recording this webinar so that you can hopefully just pass this on to them. Neither Bill nor I is responsible for recording it, so hopefully it will work. And we just have to talk. So we want to talk about the professional advantages of the program, about the general curriculum, what the requirements are, and just a little bit about, you know, honestly, why a program like this is needed and why we did this. Because of course it takes a long time to start a new program, especially a master's program here at Catholic U. And so, Bill, let me just throw it to you first. I mean, why a graduate program in human rights at all?
Well, you know, like you said, in our quick 30 years since we met when we were high school students, I've noticed one common thing, which is the conversation about rights is very impoverished, inadequate, unhelpful in our society. And I think that we need to think more deeply about rights. You know, if you ask probably anybody who's listening to this, or any of your students, or just the person on the street, they would probably say they favor human rights. They think it's a good idea. They believe in human rights, but when you go beyond that, what are human rights? How do you determine what they are? How do you have a conversation that's useful with somebody else about human rights? How do you make decisions as a voter or as a policymaker about what policies to pursue? It's very impoverished. So I wanted to have a program where that was our purpose, which was to really think deeply about rights. And as you said, I've been in the public policy realm for many years. And then the Institute for Human Ecology invited me to start this program in human rights to do what I've just said, to think deeply about human rights, to think about it from a multidisciplinary perspective. It's not just a political science program. It's not a law degree, but it looks at this issue of human rights. It's multidisciplinary, so it includes law, it includes political science, it includes theology, and it includes philosophy. And those last two elements, philosophy and theology, are particularly something I think we bring to the program that some other programs don't bring, because the Western intellectual tradition, and particularly Catholic social thought, which for those who don't know is basically reflection by the magisterium on issues, is a rich resource that can help us think about human rights. So that's why we started a Catholic.
So is that, I mean, because there are lots of programs on human rights, is that, I know CUA, I mean, for people that maybe don't know Catholic U, I mean, we have a school of philosophy, one of the only actual schools of philosophy in the country. That's a crown jewel, but is it that? Is it the Catholic, the integration of the Catholic intellectual tradition? What makes this program unique, or at least different from a lot of the others that are on offer?
Well, I think there's several things. First of all, it is in Washington, D.C., which is, the center of obviously political life in the country, but also the center of non-governmental or NGOs. There's almost every NGO, humanitarian or human rights, is going to have a headquarters or an office here in D.C. That's one thing that makes it unique. But the other one is the Catholic perspective, which doesn't mean this is not a catechetical class. So we're not studying the catechism. But on the other hand, we realize that one of the deep resources of reflection on human rights has been done by the Catholic Church, particularly the popes, and particularly John Paul II. I would say the inspiration for our program is really John Paul II, and the way in his very first encyclical, he engaged the modern human rights project. Some of the people listening, Jay, may have had an opportunity to watch the third human rights lecture. We have one every year that we did a couple weeks ago, which was with some members of this Commission on Inalienable Rights.
Right.
And we talked about tradition of rights, but for a Catholic in the modern era, you have to reckon with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I, as a lawyer, think the Universal Declaration is really quite good, and the panelists at our human rights lecture 2 weeks ago also think the Declaration is pretty good. John Paul II thinks the Declaration was pretty good, but it doesn't. What it does is it gives you a kind of a wonderful catalog of rights, but it doesn't provide an explanation. It doesn't provide an explanation because there was no agreement on the explanation. There was an agreement on the catalog of rights, but not on the explanation. So what John Paul II proposed in his first encyclical and his whole pontificate was to engage this catalog and talk about have a deeper understanding of this catalog, why it makes sense, why it is good for the human person, why it's good for life together in community or the common good. So I'll take one more word about the Universal Declaration. So for those who don't know, that is the document that came out of after the Second World War, when the United Nations, 3 years after the war, released this declaration. The significance of it is that for the only time I know of in world history, you had an agreement by the, quote, world on a catalog of rights. And the reason there was agreement is because the Second World War had resulted in the deaths of 50 million innocent non-combatants. So the world said, we don't want to ever have anything like that happen again. How do we stop it? We recognize human rights. So that's kind of what we call framing the modern human rights project as post-World War II. And I think it's full of promise, but it needs engagement from people shaped in the Western Catholic intellectual tradition to reach its fullness, I think.
Well, do you think that's, because of course, if you're in the academy, you realize there's rights talk on the left and the right, and on the left, there's a sort of, this is just my description, but kind of a, I don't know, rights maximalization, in which you talk about people having universal rights to broadband access or something like that. And then there's a sort of counter reaction on the right that would sort of dismiss rights talk as somehow meaningless or want to replace it. Do you think that's in part because there was this sort of general agreement, as you said, on a catalog of the Universal Declaration, but there wasn't a sort of philosophical foundation, and so that's sort of missing? Yeah,
I think that's a big part of the answer. I think that it's a big mistake, either one of those two extremes you mentioned, which is wishes are not rights.
Right.
Desires are not rights. I mean, what you have to do, I'm a lawyer, so my background, my training is, if you're going to say something's a right, first of all, I'm going to say, show me a document that's legally binding that recognizes it. And if there is no such document, then convince me I should recognize it. Because rights in some kind of stratosphere of abstract theorizing is great, in the realm of abstract theorizing. But if you can't convince other people to recognize that right, if you can't persuade them, it's just kind of ridiculous. But on the other end, to ignore human rights, I think is a gigantic mistake that many conservatives make, because, as I said, I think human rights is the lingua franca of our age. It's the common language. It's what people instinctively believe in. And I think it resonates the truth about the human person and about human society. We just have to, kind of unpack that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a good thing that people have this intuition that there are rights, but it's so inchoate and so confused that I think there's a reaction among some of my fellow conservatives to say, well, let's just junk the whole thing. And so that's why I think this program is so important. Well, I know the MA program is entrusted to St. Josephine Vaquita, and I actually don't know the story of that, but I know it. Why is that? What's the thinking behind that?
Let me tell you, Jay, and to the folks listening in, I'll show you something I have here, which is this book. This is Josephine Vaquita. She is a Catholic saint. She was originally from Sudan. She was taken in slavery in the late 1800s. She ended up in Italy, and she became a saint. She is unbelievable. I mean, she's a true saint because she forgave the people who kidnapped her. She's, in fact, sees it as providential because it brought her to know more deeply a faith that she had instinctively kind of sensed when she was living in the remote area. She said she always knew that, she thanked the Catholic Church because it introduced her to the God she had met in her childhood. But this is another picture of her, another picture connected with her, which is the day she was canonized in the year 2000. And I was there for that. It was on the same day that Catherine Drexel was canonized, as well as the Chinese martyrs were canonized. And it was an incredible day because I was there with a lot of Sudanese people. Why was I there with a lot of Sudanese people? Because around the year 2000, I had founded an NGO, a non-governmental organization that worked in the Sudan, and we did a couple of things. We tried to stop genocide in a certain part of the country and to stop slavery. So when I was there, and this is a film that we produced, it's called The Hidden Gift, War and Faith in Sudan, which we premiered it in Los Angeles. And anyway, I think the film is available at the Holocaust Museum and other things. But my connection to Vaquita, then when I was in Sudan, I would, this was when she was blessed. This was right before she was canonized. So I know her as Blessed Vaquita. And people were, and asking for her help, ordinary people, and throughout East Africa. So anyway, she is kind of the inspiration, or the saint over the program because of her own experience. She was a victim of slavery, but through her faith, her encounter with the Catholic faith, she became a great saint, and the people who were being oppressed and killed, sought her aid. So she is the patroness of the program, and she's a great saint.
That's great. I didn't know that story. It's really moving. Well, let's switch to the more mercenary side. The reality is we're talking about a graduate program, this MA in Human Rights. And so I'm wondering, we've now had a few classes, and I'm just wondering, what are the sort of professional advantages that a program like this offers? What sort of things, might there be a benefit to doing this?
Well, I think there's many answers to the question. One is, for instance, if you're thinking, well, I want to go to law school,
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of designed as a program for those people who are very interested in being involved in the issues, but don't want to go 3 years to law school and incur that heavy debt.
Yeah.
So there's an advantage. You have a graduate degree. You've learned to think about rights, and should be able, you could look for humanitarian organizations. You could look for non-NGO organizations. You could look in the federal government, which includes obviously Congress as well as executive agencies like the State Department or the Department of Health and Human Services. Like my students this semester, we have kind of a Wednesday afternoon session where we talk to somebody who is involved in human rights work, so the students can learn about the different options. We talk to people from Capitol Hill, from the Congress. We are soon going to talk to somebody from the Department of Health and Human Services. We talk to people from non-governmental organizations. So like today, earlier this afternoon, we talked to an organization that's against human trafficking and against sexual exploitation of young people and through the trafficking, etc. So one of the advantages of our program, I think, is you will be, kind of equipped to work in any of those kind of arenas, and through these networks of people that I met in my 30 years since high school, you will learn about different kinds of options. Because people, one of the people we're talking today, she said, you may be sitting there as a student and knowing there's some injustice in the world, or something you want to do something about, you don't know how to do it. But if you work with one of these nonprofits, just a little bit of action can have huge results, because a lot of things are ignored. This is an example and something, again, we'll talk about in my course. But like Sudan, why did I get involved in Sudan? Because I was working at a human rights organization where I believed that religious, freedom of religion was important. And so whenever a religious figure came in or a religious issue arose, it was kind of bounced over to me. That was kind of my expertise or my area. And I met a bishop from Sudan who needed help. I had never heard of Sudan. I might have heard of it, but right. I didn't realize genocide and slavery were ongoing in Sudan. It kind of pricked my conscience, and I decided that I wanted to do something about it. So one of the advantages of this program is that if you want to work in human rights, you're not quite sure where, you're not quite sure, it'll give you an opportunity to connect with and hear about lots of things that maybe, maybe your call. And being here in DC and these networks of people, I think facilitate that a lot. So that's an advantage.
Definitely. And you're talking about these networks. I know there's an impressive advisory board to the program. Tell folks a little bit about the advisory board.
Yeah, it's a real privilege for me to mention the advisory board, because again, in these 30 short years, I had the opportunity to meet some really world historical figures, I think, including the bishop from the Sudan and some of the others. But one of them is the lady who wrote this book, Marianne Glendon, who is, this is the book on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's called A World Made New. And she was the chair of the Commission on Inalienable Rights, which I mentioned a minute ago.
Yep.
And I mentioned her because she is on our advisory board for this program. And another person you mentioned earlier, Jay, is on the advisory board, which I would imagine most of these folks listening have heard about, which is Robert George at Princeton University. You can't say enough about Robbie. He's involved in everything. He has what was by kind of consensus considered the number one chair in political science in the country, which was the McCormick Chair of Jurisprudence at Princeton. He has it now. And he's very much involved in our program. He'll be speaking to the students again in my program later this year. And he's very involved in it. So we also have John Keown, who is, in my opinion, the world's leading expert on the question of euthanasia and assisted suicide. But he's a legal, he would say he's a medical lawyer. I say he's a legal philosopher. But he's going to give another lecture in 2 weeks, and I invite people listening to, it's on November the 15th, listen to that. It's another human rights lecture where he's going to look at the ethics of nuclear deterrence. He's a full professor at Georgetown University. He holds the Rose Kennedy Chair in Christian Ethics. So we have him on the program as an advisor. We have Thomas Farr, who career State Department employee who headed the Office on International Religious Freedom when it first started, and who founded a program at Georgetown on religious freedom, and now runs the Religious Freedom Institute. We have Kevin Flannery, who's professor of philosophy at the Gregorian in Rome. We have John DiUlio, who is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, particularly in the kind of issues that are not civil political so much as social and economic and things like that. We have, let's see, Helen Albury, who is the famous pro-life advocate and professor, used to be the spokesperson for the U.S. Bishops Conference and is now at George Mason Law School. So that's our advisory board, and it's a great, I think, asset for students to be able to have some interaction with and be connected with those people. Those people have had a big impact in my thinking, and I think they would help these potential students as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a who's who, and that includes you. I mean, I'm interviewing you, but I mean, I know you've got a recent book out. Let's talk a bit about it. It's called Unborn Human Life and Fundamental Rights, Leading Constitutional Cases Under Scrutiny, that focuses specifically, of course, on unborn human life, which is a subset of all the kind of human rights concerns. Tell us a little bit about that book.
Well, I show you that book.
There it is.
It's an international project. It's kind of, in a sense, a kind of a comparative law project, which I wrote in it. Jerry Bradley from Notre Dame wrote in it. William Benchy, who's the very famous lawyer. He's the emeritus chair at Trinity University, one of the big universities in the world on human rights. He wrote about the Irish situation. Then we have a number of people who wrote about Latin America and Europe. And the purpose of the book is to think about unborn human life, because this is central to the teaching of John Paul II, but I think fully available through natural law reasoning or other resources. If you don't protect the weak, what is your argument for protecting the powerful? And there's nothing weaker or less, has less of a voice than those who are not yet born. So what this book does is it looks at how this issue has been treated under constitutional cases around the world. As John Paul II said, the right to life is the first right, because without it, you can't have any other. Right. And also, as Mother Teresa said, and she's kind of, you'll see in some of our posters and things, we have a picture of John Paul II with Mother Teresa. And she said, we certainly, the poor are central, important. The church talks about a fundamental option for the poor. Yes. But as Mother Teresa said, the poorest of the poor are the unborn. So that's the perspective we want to bring to the program. So I was very glad when this book came out, and as you know, Jay, as a renowned author, you know, sometimes the birthing process of one of these books can take forever. And this took forever, but I'm glad it's out.
Long labor pains, and I know just the book's out, and there was the major decision right in Poland here just the other day on abortion.
That's right. That's right. It's very interesting. One of our chapters is about Poland, and Poland.
Yeah, I mean, we think about this as Americans. We focus on the American context, but of course, it's an abiding concern around the world.
Yeah,
I want to tell.
I just
go ahead.
Just because human rights are, you know, to summarize it, either they attach to all human beings, or they don't really attach to any human beings.
Right.
They either come along with humanity, or they're not human rights. There's rights we give to some human beings and not to others. So it's a concern everywhere.
Absolutely. I want to tell participants, I don't think I mentioned this at the beginning, that we are taking questions. And so we're going to save the time here at the end for questions, but you feel free to post questions in the chat. I'll try to look over there from time to time, but definitely want to have some time for questions at the end. But let's just get some kind of basic nitty-gritty about the program. So Bill, talk a little bit about the curriculum, the coursework that students would expect in this program, and how long it takes to complete.
Yeah, one of the advantages, I think, of the program is it can be completed in a year, and that's the expectation as a student. Would come in the fall, you take 5 courses, which is demanding, but the students are doing it, and it did it last year. It's an interdisciplinary course, so you'll take courses in law, you'll take philosophy, you'll take theology, you'll take political science, and then in the springtime, you'll have room for an elective or so, but you'll also have an internship, which will be for credit at the university. So you'll get to find an organization that you want to work with and start. It may not be where you end up or even where you think you're going to end up, but it will give you a real sense of what it's like working at an organization that's working on human rights. And then we have a capstone class, which is real fun, which I teach, which tries to draw all these things together. So, you know, law, canon laws, philosophy, theology, political science, tries to draw them all together and make sense of it in the Catholic perspective. And I've been privileged in my life. I've worked internationally for the whole time I've been doing things. But I worked at the UN, United Nations, for some years as a private sector advisor. And while I was there, I met one of the diplomats from the Holy See, from the Vatican, who is now a professor at Mount St. Mary's and rector at Mount St. Mary's in Maryland. And so he's a career diplomat, and so he teaches that course with me. So we look at human rights not just in a theoretical way, but we look at it in an international diplomatic way. You know, how do you actually go about human rights and trying to achieve something in this area? So the students will have essentially 5 courses each semester, but one of which is that internship. They will have some room for electives, but otherwise there'll be a curriculum they take together, and that's another strength of the program. Is because the students come in together, they form a cohort, they get to know each other, the professors get to know them, they kind of mutually reinforce one another and hold one another up. I remember last year, some of the law professors were telling me that it was just an impressive group of people. So they'll come in together, they'll form a cohort, and they can finish up in a year and go, into the job market.
Wow. I mean, what kind of students have you had these first kind of years? What's the first couple of years of the program in terms of background? I mean, what students have been coming into the program? I'm just, if somebody's thinking, okay, I'm an undergrad right now, would I be a good fit for this?
Yeah, I think we've had the 2 classes are slightly different. The first class all of the students had been out of college for a year or two, or maybe 3 or 4, and working. This year, the class is chiefly those coming directly from undergraduate studies.
Hmm.
So if you're in either one of those positions and you're listening in, the program's fine, would be fine for you. Students from both those backgrounds have done fine. I think, you know, if you're interested in human rights and you want the kind of Catholic perspective, you want to be in Washington, D.C., you want to have access and, you know, interaction with people like Robbie George and, you know, others, then it's a good program for you. Whether you have, you know, you've done some work and you're looking for, you know, you've decided, well, I'm not exactly liking what I'm doing, or maybe I figured out I want to do something else, or whether you're just coming straight from the university, I think the program fits.
But it was really designed, so you'd need to be doing it full time. But if you do it full time, you can do it in a year. Is it also possible to spread that out, or do you strongly encourage that students do it full time for the 1 year?
Yeah, well, you know, to be honest with you, you know, the situation we've had with COVID and everything is it's just, you know, causing everybody, including everybody listening, to do adjustments and different things. So we will have a part-time option, but the part-time option starts in the fall.
Okay.
That means people who are working in Washington can take the program part-time. That means if you take it part-time, you can't finish it in a year. You
Right.
have to take several years to finish it. But we had originally weren't going to do that, but we've decided it makes sense just in a changed world.
But should students definitely, or is there rolling enrollment, or do students definitely, they need to start in the fall?
They need to start in the fall because I want students to come in as a cohort, even if it's part-time. Like this year, Jay, we have a couple of students who couldn't start because they're in foreign countries. They're not in the United States, and they couldn't get visas.
Right.
So we let them start part-time, but they're still part of the cohort. You know, they've all kind of met one another virtually, and they're in touch with one another. I want that experience. So I want them students to have that experience. So our plan is everybody starts in the fall.
And it's a fairly small program, right? So, I mean, would the students expect a fairly small, intimate seminar type of atmosphere, or what are the classes like?
Yeah, I mean, our group is around half a dozen. That's, we think, the best size. You know, maybe sometime in the future we'll have 20, but I mean, we want to start small so that people do know each other, so the professors know them, they recognize them together, and we see, you know, how this works. I mean, this is only in the first part of its second year. So
Right.
I also want to mention that about the cost of the program, and that is also part of the reason that we want to have a manageable number of students, because we do have some scholarships available. I mean, first, we have a discounted rate from the university, which is a tremendous thing. And then second, we have scholarships available. Now, the scholarships are only available to full-time students.
Okay.
And they're not, it depends on the circumstance of the students. They're merit-based. So, you know, I encourage people who are interested to apply to the program and get admitted so that you can be considered for one of these scholarships.
Okay, so describe the basic application requirements then for students. So we're in October here. So what do students need to do in order to apply?
Yeah, first thing I just note is, you know, we go to the mahumanrights.com webpage and you can see all this, but basically, you know, your undergraduate, you know, depending on what you are, I mean, if you've been working for a while, then, you know, we want to hear from people you've worked for, people you've had experience with since undergraduate. If you're an undergraduate, you know, we want recommendations, you know, from professors or others maybe you've worked with closely. So we have 3 letters of recommendation, transcripts. You have to do an interview with me. You take the GRE, although you can request the GRE be waived. Those are the basic requirements. And you have to, sorry, one other thing.
It's all on the website, right? It's all on the web page.
Yeah, it's all on the web page. The one other thing, though, I would say, which is important, is a statement of purpose where you explain why you want to be in this program. This is not like every other program. If you want just a regular human rights degree that you could get at, any other university, this isn't really for you. We're going to, I think we have a deeper consideration of it. And we'd like to see if you agree and what you think about it.
Yeah. So what's the deadline? So I know it would be for the next, it'd be for fall of 2021. So what's the deadline for applications?
Yeah, the kind of very last deadline is in the summer. But if you want to be considered for a scholarship, we have a priority deadline of the middle of January. But, the sooner the better, because we don't have an inexhaustible fund of scholarship money. So if you want to get in on the scholarships, you really should move ahead.
Absolutely. Okay. And you said so GRE is required, but then there's a waiver for GRE. Is that just for this year?
No, it can be waived. What I mean by that is you have to request a waiver.
Gotcha.
And as long as you can show reasons that we shouldn't rely on a GRE like you did well in college, or you've got great recommendations from your current employer or something else, we can waive the GRE.
So so I know the inception of the program, we've had mostly either students the first year that were out a few years, and then this year a lot of students that have been undergrads, but I assume also people that have maybe been in the professional world or working for a nonprofit. Obviously those are always been part of the market that we're thinking for people that could be in this program, right?
Right. I mean, one of the students we had last year had worked for a couple of years for a nonprofit here in DC that worked on kind of natural law and jurisprudential issues. She wasn't a lawyer, but she'd worked there. But she wanted to go back to school, so she had worked in a nonprofit. So if you're at a nonprofit and you kind of want to change your career or whatever, also I would say, we have a part-time student this year. And I think that getting this degree is something her employer encourages because they see it as helping her, advance within her job. So for people, part-time people, I think that's often the case. And often your employer, or I don't know about often, but sometimes your employer will help you with the costs of the program.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's good to know. I've got several questions here. So the first one is, does one have to be Catholic to do this program?
No, you don't have to be. In fact, the first year, we had a person who was, each year we've had a person who's not Catholic. One has an Islamic background and one has Protestant. What you have to be is kind of interested in the Catholic intellectual tradition. Nobody's asking anybody to convert to Catholicism, but our program looks at that. And so that means people like Robert George, that means people like Mary Ann Glendon, as well as John Paul II. I mean, so it's a rich, broad intellectual tradition. It's not a narrow sectarian thing, but we are going to study things like John Paul II's encyclical on life called Evangelium Vitae. We're going to study Redemptor Hominis, which was his encyclical that I said talked about human rights. So I think that's a great plus. So you don't have to be Catholic to do it. You just have to want to.
Yeah. Well, and people sometimes, a lot of Catholics don't know this, but Catholic social teaching claims to be grounded in natural reason. So it's not like, well, you have to be a Catholic to talk about solidarity or subsidiarity or human rights for that matter. Yeah, and so I think that's exactly right. In fact, I know there've been some of my best friends that have gone to Catholic University Law School have been evangelicals and have really enjoyed it. So how do students typically fund the degree? You mentioned that there's a discounted rate on tuition, and then there's also limited merit-based scholarships. And so if you're doing it full time, I mean, what would be the other options?
Well, you could I would not, for just in the abstract, I wouldn't recommend having a part-time job, but I did in the first year, several of the students had a part-time job because they had one and they kind of kept the connection to the job, so they weren't full-time with the job, but the job let them work part-time, and they were able to do it. And
Right.
they said it was not a problem. I mean, I don't know. They worked, 10. Their comments to me were, 10 or 12 hours a week of work. They could handle that with that course load.
Okay.
So I think, as I said, it's merit-based scholarships. Some people have had, have paid for school like they would otherwise, which is they've had either savings or they've had parental help or they've had some other kind of help. So there's really no typical way to do it. I think all the students have done it differently.
Okay, and so on the waiver of the GRE, somebody's asked, if we choose to waive the GRE, will we still be considered for merit-based scholarships? That's a good question.
Yeah, you would be.
Okay.
You would be, yeah. You could be. I mean, we have to waive it, but if we waive it, yes, you would be.
Okay, that's good to know. And so obviously people are interested in this, and especially unless they happen to just have a big nest egg, and that applying sooner rather than later, it sounds like to me, is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, Jay, is we're blessed to have the scholarship money we can give, because again, we have the discounted rate, which is a tremendous thing. So it would be very expensive without the discounted rate, but then we have these scholarships too.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing because you can knock out in a year if you do it full time, even the regular discounted rate without scholarship, if you sort of compare it to a lot of other programs, and to be able to do it in a year, I think is tremendous.
Yep. Well, I mean, I agree. I'm not saying it's easy, but it depends. If you're out there and you're thinking, if you're kind of wishy-washy about it, then don't go to graduate school. But if you're ready to go, really, and you think, I have either a calling or I really have a strong push to this, I'm very interested in it, I'm ready for this, then, I encourage you to do it. I don't downplay that it can be, difficult, but we try to alleviate that through the scholarship program and the discounted rate.
That's great. Okay, so I've got one more question. So is it possible to defer if you're admitted? So if somebody applied now and then for some reason they couldn't go, could they defer till the next year?
Yes, it is. In fact, we had a student who was going to start this fall who deferred to next year.
Okay.
And
this has been a weird year all around, obviously, with the pandemic and the lockdowns. So it's okay. That's really good to know. Well, this is a really exciting program, Bill. I mean, we've talked about it, but actually I've learned some things, actually, even though I'm part of the Institute for Human Ecology. And it's just really exciting. It's great to have you here for this. And I'd encourage, if you're sitting in on this and are at all interested in this, jump on it. I mean, it's October, but January is going to be right around the corner. And don't delay that, because this really is, I mean, financially, if you just compare this to some other programs, it's really a remarkable, it's a remarkable opportunity just based on the generosity of donors that helped to start this program. Well, Bill, it's great to talk to you about this, and it's a blessing to have you as a colleague here at Catholic U.
Thank you, Jay. I feel the same. And, any of the students, any of the people listening can always, email me, and I'm happy to answer questions or follow up.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. God bless, and I hope you found this informative. And we've recorded this, and we'll have it on the website. So if you want to look at it again, or you want to send it to other friends that you know that might be interested in the program, we hope you'll do that. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Jay Richards and William Saunders with the Catholic University of America.